Hey there, folks. Welcome to episode 7 of A Pebble in a Pond podcast. John Steinbeck once said, "If a story is not about the hearer, he or she will not listen. A great, lasting story is about everyone, or it will not last. The strange and foreign is not interesting, only the deeply personal and familiar." I'd always planned on making multiple episodes like this one. When I thought about the podcast, this is kind of what I originally envisioned. At some point in time, I'd like to do entire episodes of listener submitted stories. We're still not there yet. They're still trickling in, but I really would like to be able to just sit here and tell people stories, and anyone that heard the podcast would start to get a feel for the kind of people that were listening and the stories that they all had to tell. We're not there yet, but I am going to tell a few of my own stories of things that have happened in my life and moments that changed me and the people involved forever. I also have a short story that was submitted by somebody that listens to the podcast, apparently. And I'm going to give that a quick read as well. Now, let me be really clear about this. I had a lot to think about for this episode, and I even now I'm kind of going back and forth in my mind over the order that I want to tell these in and how exactly I want to do this, because it really does matter how you format these stories. But what I've decided to do is I'm going to start with a more serious and honestly kind of a disturbing story. It's not one that thinking about, that I don't think I've ever told anybody the entire story. And part of that is because I had kind of blocked out parts of it. And it wasn't until a conversation just a few months ago that I started to remember like key pieces of it. And now I feel like I have the whole story. There may be some stuff that I'm still not able to remember, but I'm going to do my best to tell this story because I know that it is a disturbing and unhappy story that ends in the best way possible. So I'm going to warn everybody now that there probably should be a trigger warning for the first story that I'm going to tell. And that story will involve some violence and an attempted, I guess I can say it on the podcast, right? I think it's attempted rape and some underage drinking and possible drug use. Now that all sounds horrible when I say it all like that, but trust me when I tell you this is not a story that ends badly for everybody. So just trust me when I tell you, just suffer through the bad parts to get to the good part. It's all important, and honestly, I feel good about telling the story. So then like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna read a user submitted story. It's a short one, but it does have some meat to it. So I'll go ahead and read that, and then we'll talk about it real briefly, and then we'll finish up with a positive story, a happy story, and that's what we have. We're just gonna do story time, and that's why the episode is called Storytime. So let's get started. Okay, so how do we start the first story? I guess we start near the beginning. If some of you have arrived here from TikTok, then you'll know that I've told a story that kind of ties into this on TikTok. This is about a particular point in my life that I am at the same time very proud of, but also very regretful of. And you're gonna understand that pretty quickly here. When I don't even really know the particular age range, but let's just say 20-ish, or young 20, early 20. My friend and I, well, actually, my two friends and I, were very, very much driven by thoughts of justice and, stopping crime and things like that. Now, part of it was, we were still coming out of our kid phase where we had all wanted to be superheroes, but other parts of it were where we grew up and how we grew up. It wasn't hard, we grew up in the suburbs, but we saw a lot of the kind of the way that some people would just get away with so much, and other people, would have their entire lives ruined by a simple mistake. And it just didn't sit right. We went to a relatively affluent high school, and there were kids that would literally walk through the high school halls selling drugs to teachers, and nobody would say anything and nobody would stop them. And then at the same time, there would be a kid that would be caught with a bag of pot and he would be expelled. And it just didn't make sense. It really, at the time, it really bothered us a lot. It still bothers me to this day to just see how unfair the system seemed to be to a lot of people, and how some people just got away with whatever they wanted to. So this all kind of culminated in, well, there were a lot of things that we did. I have stories that I could tell for days about that and different things that we did to try to, I guess, mete out our own justice, if you will. But it ends with us joining the Guardian Angels in the city that we live in. There was a downtown chapter of the Guardian Angels. For those that aren't aware what the Guardian Angels are, and I don't know if too many people listening to this are painfully unaware of that, but the Guardian Angels are a group of, they called us visual deterrents. That's what we were. We were a group of people that started in New York City, and I would say the name of the guy that started it and all that stuff, but there's just no reason to get into that because he's kind of a jerk. So, allegedly, obviously. But I had joined this group because I had seen them out in the streets, and I had heard about them and I read about them, and I decided that if I couldn't go, put on a mask and be a superhero, that at the very least I could go help somebody. And I knew that that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to weed out some of the drug problems. They were trying to help people that needed it. They were trying to, in general, just clean up the city a little bit, and do it in a way that was, positive. It was not a, I guess you could say it was a little bit of a shock once my friends and I joined, because, in your head you get this kind of romanticized idea of what these, crime stoppers are like. And when you get into, when the first time you roll up to meet them all is the middle of a park, and they've got a literal just a rope on the ground, like set up as your sparring area, and there's just it was literally the most ragtag collection of people you could imagine. And one thing that I would like to point out is that when we trained, the man that trained us was a former Marine, and he took it very seriously. And at the time, I didn't really understand it. Now, just as a side note here, before I continue with that, it's important to understand that when I was, I want to say 10 or 11, I started taking Kung Fu. Now, the particular form of Kung Fu that I took was not one that could be competitive. You couldn't enter into tournaments because you didn't learn how to, fight for points. You learned how to fight for real. So a lot of the stuff that I learned to do were throat strikes and eye strikes and, sweeping people's legs out and things like that. Like, it's just not stuff that you did in tournaments. So I never really got into that part of the martial arts community. I was just learning how to fight. And then we moved away a couple of years later. And when I moved, the interest was still there. The desire was still there, but I was nervous and anxious about meeting new people and things like that. So it took me some years after that to kind of get my bearings and get, understood what I was doing. And then I started to meet some people that were doing some martial arts, and some people that, I ended up hooking up with people that were actually very well known, and I'm not going to name names here, but very well known in the martial arts community. And I ended up, going and doing some of their classes and some of their camps and things like that. And it really did encourage a spark in me to continue to learn to fight and to take care of myself. So I have a little bit of a background. Now, obviously, I don't have the background of a Marine who's training people how to fight, which just ties us back to the original story again. But I did know how to fight. So when we show up at the very first meeting, I wasn't completely out of my element. Now, granted, like I said, I hadn't done tournament fighting, but I had done fighting. Like, I had learned to fight. So when we get in and they give us some gloves and some headgear, and we get in and we start fighting, sparring it with each other. This is the first time that, we literally show up, introduce ourselves, and just start fighting each other. That's how that story starts. Really, it's just us fighting each other. And one of the things that I learned very quickly is that I can really take a punch. I really, really can take a punch. And I don't mean just one. I mean, I get into the ring, I say with quote fingers. Like I said, it's just a rope on the ground. And I get in and we stand there, and I start sparring with this Marine. And he just obliterates me. But I don't fall down. I mean, he hits me probably 6 times right across the head. But I don't fall down. And I'm not fast enough at the time to really return any punches. I'm just guarding myself. And so he starts to punch, he starts to try to get in and start trying to work my body a little bit and trying to, he wants me to fall. He wants me to fall down. He's trying to, I guess that's the Marine in him, trying to break me, trying to, make me fall down. And he just couldn't do it. And I just sat there and I took every punch that he had. And like I said, I couldn't really return. I couldn't really counterpunch because he was just too fast for me. But I also knew that he couldn't knock me down. I knew that he was never going to get me down. So that was kind of the start of what people started to know about me. So nobody had ever stood in the ring with him. Nobody had ever stayed up. Nobody. And that goes back to when he was active military. This is a guy that knew how to fight. This was a guy that knew how to kill. And even he said afterwards, nobody's ever stood up for as long as you did against me. He's like, I don't know what you did. I don't know if it was, your headgear was on wrong and you just couldn't feel the punches, but nobody's ever stayed up. And, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that I don't feel pain. Getting hit by that guy hurt. But I just knew that if I fell, that people would, I guess I shouldn't say knew that. I thought that. I thought that if I fell, that people would think less of me. And the idea that, these people that I just met and these people that I was trying to, be on their team and join up, the idea that they would think less of me was enough to just, I would have ran through a wall at that point in time. And there wasn't going to be much of anything that was going to stop me. So as that's the start of the story, and that's the reason I wanted to bring that up. You'll see. I've always been pretty resilient. I've always had a decent amount of endurance, and not endurance in the sense that I can run far distances for a long period of time. Not that kind of endurance, but endurance in the sense that I can really take a punishment. So as time goes on, we end up patrolling and joining and patrolling and doing all the things. And at first we just went downtown and we just wandered around on the streets on nights like Fridays and Saturday nights and things like that. But as we kind of branched out, people started to recognize us, people started to know us, and so as we branched out, we started to go into some of the worst and worst parts of the city. One particular patrol point that we would have is my partner and I, which everybody had a partner. Now my partner was not one of my friends. My friends partnered up on their own. The other two guys that joined with me, that they have their own stories, and I joined up with one of the other guys. Now, the guy that was my partner, I won't say his name because we all had street names. We all had call signs basically. And his call sign was actually his last name. So I'm not going to say his name, but I will tell you that his name was Mike. So Mike and I, we were partners, and we were in pretty much constant contact with each other. This was when beepers were really popular. He had a cell phone, but I did not, and so I just had a pager, and he used to hit me on that pager like multiple times a day with like all sorts of cryptic number messages and things like that I'd have to decipher. But he and I used to patrol out at a club. Now, this was not a club that was downtown. This club was a little ways removed from downtown, but it had become synonymous with sexual assault cases and rapes. And what would happen was these club organizers would have they had a night where it was 17 and up with ID, but nobody ever checked the ID. And so you'd get these girls that were 15 and 16 that were showing up and going to this club. Obviously for a lot of girls that are 15, they look 17, they look 25. It's just a matter of, how they do their makeup and how time has, affected them. So a lot of those situations ended really badly because these were young girls that were showing up to go to a club and didn't have the wherewithal and the understanding of what they were walking into. Now, you do that a couple of nights, and sooner or later, that's going to start to draw the predators, the men that are there to take advantage of that. Now, those men, some of those men were there all the time, but a lot of them, when they started to realize what the club was doing and what the club was promoting, it proliferated in a way that was not just disturbing, but the quote from Star Wars, "You'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy." Well, that's kind of what this club was like. So, with that in mind, I want to say that we patrolled on Tuesdays and Thursdays primarily. They had the club did a decent job of keeping off-duty police people there on like Friday and Saturday, which those are the big like normal club at nights. So They did a good job of keeping that patrolled there. But during those weekdays where they would have, and these are school nights too, keep that in mind. So you've got 15, 16-year-old girls going out on school nights. Not that, I care that much about school nights, but I'm just saying that's something, something to keep in mind is how scummy these promoters were. But Mike and I, we used to go out there of our own volition. This was not something that was like a guardian angel sanctioned patrol necessarily. I mean, it was because our leader knew that we were doing it, but it was also not like the whole team wasn't out there. It was just Mike and I, and we did it kind of as a volunteer service. Really, we were just going out there because the cops weren't out there. So, in that period of time, it was probably I want to say a 10-month period of time that we patrolled there. I saw a lot. I experienced a lot. I am not going to lie to you and tell you that let's put it this way. Most of the memories of those interactions are disturbing to me. I saw women at their absolutely most terrified at the worst point of their life, and the only thing that stopped it for at least 9 women, the only thing that stopped it from becoming the actual worst moment of their entire existence was me and my partner. And I know that. Now, the story I'm going to tell you here is, I guess you could say 9.5, and this is the story of the half. And it's, like I said, this is not a great story to tell, but it is a story that has a happy ending. So, just stay with me. I know I've had a long intro to this, but I wanted to make sure that you had context for what I was doing and why I was there. So I'm gonna set this up here, and then we'll get to the part that I know is going to be a little disturbing. So this was a Thursday night, and Mike and I had been out on patrol. Now, when I say we'd been out on patrol at this place, basically the club was set inside of a strip mall, and the nights that they would do their big events and the weekends and things like that, the parking lot of the strip mall would fill with cars. And I mean, this is a large parking lot, and it was completely full of cars. This place was just killing it. They just were making so much money because they were the only club in town that was doing these like underage nights, basically. Now, just saying that, especially now in today's world, gives me a like visceral ick feeling. But this was back then, and that's what people did. That's what some clubs at least thought it was a good idea to have an underage night. So Mike and I had been out patrolling for, I would say, probably about an hour. We got there right around, I think it was about 9 p.m. It could have been a little bit earlier because we wanted to get set up, and usually we would get there and we would set up a patrol point. We would start from basically just outside of the entrance of the club. The club owners knew we were out there. So we would start just outside the entrance of the club, and we would keep we had a couple of radios, and we had like bottles of water and stuff like that, like refills and stuff that we would set up there so that we could, we would basically do a couple of laps, and then we would go there and replenish or take a break or whatever for a few minutes. So we would set up our patrol point, and then we would basically just start patrolling. Now, what was interesting about this, and I know that this is, maybe this is too much information for some folks, but what's interesting about it is that we would, if we were patrolling in a city street, we would just walk down the sidewalk. And the whole point was for us to be visually there and people see us and know that we were essentially, as they called us, vigilantes, and not to do stuff. Don't do the crime, right? Like, you see the people there to stop the crime, don't do the crime. But we were, in this case, we weren't necessarily trying to be visual deterrents. We understood the people that we were dealing with, right? Like, these are men that are, they're not going to stop their behavior because they see a couple of dudes in red berets walking around. That's just not how these kind of men work. So we weren't so much there to be visual deterrents. We were still wearing our shirts and our berets and everything, and we were still there to be prominent. But we also weren't trying to be prominent. We knew that these men were, scumbags. They were sneaky, and they would get these girls out in their cars and, do whatever they wanted with them. So we were actively trying to, essentially hunt. I mean, I hate to use that word, but that's what we were doing. We were trying to find these people. We were trying to find these men that were doing these things. And so we would split up, but we would always maintain visual contact. We would see each other, and we would basically comb through rows of cars. And, there were plenty of nights. We did this for, like I said, like 10 months. There were plenty of nights where we never found anything. There was, it was everything for the most part was on the up and up, or we just had really poor timing. But there were also plenty of nights where we did find stuff. And this particular night, like I said, we got there around 9:30. We'd been there about an hour. The underage stuff usually went for about 2.5 hours. They usually wrapped it up around 11:30. So people would, start to file out into the parking lot around, well, I guess not all people, but a good portion of the people, the underage crowd and stuff like that, would file out around midnight. They'd all be going to their cars. Now, here's one of the really scummy things about these promoters that I actually just thought of, is that these were underage nights, but they were only underage for girls. So if you were 17, which meant 15 or 16, if you were 17 and a girl, you could get in for free. Obviously, they didn't serve you drinks. I don't think they even served alcohol those nights, which is one of the ways that guys would get girls into their cars. They would, tell them, "Oh, I've got something to drink in the car," and the girls would go out there to drink with them. But it wasn't open for young men, right? Like, so you had to be 21 and up to be a man to get in. It wasn't even 18 and up. It was 21 and up to go hang out with 15-year-old girls. That's how scummy these people were. And what's so disturbing about it was, like I said already, these parking lots were full of cars. And what's even worse about it, now that I really am thinking about it, is what kind of parent drops your daughter off there? Like, who thinks that's okay? Like, I know that this was a different time, but even like, I lived through it. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I couldn't have done that. If it had been my daughter, I couldn't have dropped her off there. But then I kind of saw what was happening there. So anyway, we had been there about an hour. We knew that people were going to start filing out. We had about an hour and a half or so before people started filing out. So we were midway through a patrol. Now, it's hard for me to really describe the parking lot and the way it was set up this way. I would have to draw it out, and it's not really worth it. But there was basically a building that was in the middle of the parking lot. And at the time, I think it was I want to say like a auto shop of some sort. But anyway, behind the building was one of the places where we would most often find people fooling around. Now, here's a little insight into the mind of some of these sickos. They intentionally would go to this place because they knew the people that were legitimately, adults would go fool around behind this building. And they knew that if they were just back there with these girls, and they could get the girls high enough or drunk enough that the girls wouldn't, any of their protestations would not be necessarily thought of as anything out of the ordinary, because that's where people were going to fool around. So these guys, these weren't smart guys, but they were literal predators, right? Like, they knew what they were doing. They were going there to take advantage of young girls in, a situation that these girls should never have been in because of these promoters. So as we get through this particular night on the patrol, we start to get back to where this area is behind this building. Now, it's really important to understand. The reason I tell you all that is because we knew that people legitimately went back there to fool around after going to the club. Everybody's dressed sexy. And we're not trying to stop people from having a good time. That's not what we were there for. We were there to protect people. And so we had to be very careful in this particular area, because it would have been just catastrophic if we would have busted up people that were legitimately just doing the do, and started to rough up some guy that was, him and his girlfriend were just having a good time. Like, that would have been catastrophic for us. That's not something that we could have ever allowed. So we had to be very careful. And not only that, but we also didn't want to be creeps. These are people that are making out in their cars, that are getting pretty hot and heavy in their cars. And we didn't want to be the guys that were like creeping around the cars, like looking in windows and stuff. So we had to be very careful in this scenario. So what we would often do is Mike would go around one way and I would go around the other way, and we would just stand on the corners of the building. We could still see each other, but it was probably, I would say, 50 yards maybe, wide, and we would stand and we would just kind of scan the cars that were parked there. And obviously, without getting too graphic, some cars were a rockin'. So we didn't, this, like I said, this happened multiple nights, and this wasn't a big deal to us. This was something that we were used to seeing and something that we knew we had to tread carefully with. One of the things that we had learned, and this was after a few other scenarios that I won't get into now, but one of the things that we had learned was, in general, couples used the back seat. People that didn't know each other used the front seat. So I know that's a kind of a weird thing to think about, but if you're comfortable and you're going to go back there and do what you're going to do, you want to be as you want to have as much room as you possibly can, I guess. And so the couples would just be like, all right, let's jump in the back seat. And people that didn't know each other, people that were uncomfortable with each other, they would sit in the front seat. And that's one of the ways that we had kind of figured out to tell, like, what to look for. So on this night, I'm standing on the right side of the building. I look over and Mike motions to me that he thinks he sees something. So I'm sorry if I stammer a little bit. This is kind of like, it rushes back to me when I start talking about it. So he motions that he sees something, and I start to head towards him. But like I said, being careful not to intimidate or scare anybody that may be, legitimately there to just have a good time. And I see the car that he's pointing to, and it's I'm really not good with cars. I'm really not. I know that it was a red, like with chipped paint on the front end. I'll say like a Pontiac of some sort. But I mean, don't be mad at me, car makers. I don't remember. But you could see this girl in the front seat, and there was a dude in the driver's side, and she was, I want to say, she wasn't completely out cold, but she was not aware. She was not, she didn't have her awareness and her faculties about her. She was obviously very messed up. And he was leaning over towards her. You couldn't see what he was doing, but he was obviously touching her in some way. So we sat for a few moments, not even a minute, but it seemed like a long time to us. And we sat and we just observed, because once again, we didn't want to bust in on anybody that was legitimately having a good time. And what was really surreal about this moment was that he was parked at the end of this row of cars, and right next to him, the car literally right next to him was shaking, was bouncing. It was really funny now that I think about it, just the image of it. But obviously what was happening was not funny. But the image of this guy and then the car next to him just like basically lifting off its tires from its shaking. Somebody was having a very good night that night. Anyway, so we moved, well, kind of a pincer movement around the front of the car. I was on the driver's side, and Mike was on the passenger side. And the guy was completely oblivious to us even existing at that point in time. He was completely focused on this girl. So as I moved, I was standing to where I was a little bit behind the driver's side door, to where I could open the door and get out of the way if I needed to. And so Mike we used to carry large like Maglite flashlights. And so Mike takes his flashlight out and taps on the window, on the passenger side window. And the guy jumps, and the girl kind of like, he tapped loud, and it was right next to her head, so she kind of starts to kind of wake up, and she's blurry-eyed, and she starts to cover herself. This guy had started to take her top off, and who knows what else, but so she starts to cover herself. She wasn't showing anything, but you could tell that her top was loose, and so Mike asks the guy to roll down the window, and the car was on. So if the guy had really wanted to, he could have just taken off. I mean, he could have tried, but so Mike asked the guy to roll down the window, and the guy's like, who are you? I'm not rolling down the frickin' window. And so Mike's like, please sir, roll down the window, please. We're just trying to check, make sure everybody's having a good time. And then what was interesting is the car next to us that was doing all the rocking had actually stopped. So they got a show. Mike, I'm trying to remember exactly the order of the phrasing here, but Mike basically tells the guy, you need to open the window, or I'm gonna break the window in. And the guy's like, you don't you touch my car, and blah blah blah. Well, this guy still hasn't recognized the fact that I'm there. So I very deliberately, and trying to be as careful and cautious as I can, put my hand in the door handle to lift it, and the door wasn't locked. So I'm able to just lift the door, and I don't open it. I just have the door. So I give Mike a head nod to let him know that I have position, basically. And so Mike taps again, really, really hard, and you almost hard enough to break the glass. And tells the guy, you need to open the window or step out of the car. And it's becoming very obvious. I couldn't see her, but according to Mike, it's becoming very obvious this girl had no idea where she was. She was completely and totally, she was grabbing clothes, and like putting things over her, and was scared, like immediately scared. I did not know what was going on. So, sorry. I just thinking about it just makes me so angry. Mike tells this guy, I'm gonna bust in the window, and the guy goes to, like, he's leaning, like looking out the passenger window, and when Mike raps on the window, the guy turns and starts to engage the car like he's gonna take off. So I already had the door open, so I open up the door, I grab the guy. He didn't have a seatbelt on, obviously, so I just grab the guy and I go to pull him out. Well, and this is where the training montage that you imagined earlier came in. The guy is in a really odd position because I'm basically standing behind and to his left, and as I grab him, he turns and starts to swing his arm. I don't imagine he knew I was there, and I don't know who he thought he was swinging at, but I promise you he didn't think it was me. And so I'm grabbing him to pull him out of the car, and that's when I realized that it wasn't her top. I mean, her top was off, but she was basically naked from like the down, from the top down. And she had, this guy had been taking advantage of her this whole time, and she was out. Like, she had no concept of it. So she's, trying to cover herself up and put whatever clothes she can find on. She couldn't find, her underwear and things like that, but she was trying to cover herself because there's just two men now or assaulting them. And so I grab this guy and I'm pulling him out, and I'm kind of stunned because that's not something you expect to see when you open the car door. So this guy hits me, and he got me real good right across my lower left jaw. He was swinging with his right hand, and he hit me right along lower left jaw. If I hadn't been somebody that could take a punch, this would have knocked me out. I know it would have. It definitely rung my bell. I could hear literally you can hear I don't know if you've ever been punched or not, but when you get punched across the face or in the jaw, it makes your ears ring, and immediately that's what I'm hearing. And so he starts wailing on the side of my head, but after the first punch, I was able to get my head down. So he's basically hitting me, and I just moved my head away from the mic when I said that. It's funny. He's hitting me in the top of the head, which does nothing. There's no point in that. So he's just hitting his fist on my skull, which, I'm sorry for your fist, buddy. But in general, something that you need to understand from this point is that in general, if somebody starts striking at me or anybody, that gives me fair game, right? Like I can respond. Now, I'm not in a position to be able to do anything. I'm just pulling this guy out of the car. So I pull him out. I finally get him out. It's kind of tough. He's not big, but he's, a little bit stronger than I am. And so he kind of comes out of the car, and I'm his feet are still in the car, but I'm pulling him. So he kind of doesn't have the ability to catch his feet. And he falls out and actually falls into the car that was rocking. And I don't want this guy to get his bearings. I don't want him to be able to stand on his feet. I don't want him to be able to, hit me anymore. So realizing that he's starting to fall, I stomp on the back of his ankle. As somebody who's dealt with a broken ankle, that point on, I've always thought of, whenever I've gotten into any sort of physical altercations, I've always thought of take their ankles, take them out there, because I know what it's like. It's, there's nothing that will affect your mind more than not being able to move your ankle. So I stomp on his ankle. Now, obviously, this is extremely painful. I didn't break anything, but it hurts real bad. And so this guy can't get up. Now, it's important to understand, not only has he, assaulted me multiple times. Now, granted, I was grabbing him out of his car, but I knew what had happened. There's no way that this girl was aware of what had happened to her. And this guy had got some sort of drug in her and was taking advantage of her. So there was not even a second of doubt. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew exactly who this guy was, and I knew exactly what he had been doing to this girl. And so there was never a moment where I hesitated or I thought, oh, this guy doesn't deserve this. So this is where it gets a little graphic, and I want to make sure that I warn everybody, because this is, more graphic than before. So he screams a little bit and, kind of grunts and starts to stand up. And then this happened all the time. Like, these guys, when you would catch them doing these things, they go from being, Billy Badass, where they're taking advantage of 15-year-old girls, and they think they're, Don Juan Casanova, to just, not really crying, but they realize that they're caught, right? Like it's kind of like the Chris Hansen, stuff where these guys just start like blubbering. Well, this guy didn't quite get there yet. He was indignant, and he just started saying, like, just really horrible shit, like, oh, this, and I'm just gonna say the stuff he said. Please don't be upset. But and he's like, oh, that bitch deserves it. Oh, she loved it. Oh, she, and he's saying all this stuff, like almost bargaining with me, like I don't know what saying this kind of stuff is supposed to do, like to save his ass at that point in time. But that wasn't the way to go. So he starts saying, oh, she loved it, or she was, this and that, and talking about her, how she, I don't want to say it. He was saying some really crude, horrible stuff. And so I told him, at this point in time, I'm standing, holding him so that he's not bashing his head against the car next to me, and I've got him from behind, like his leg is behind me, and I've got my foot on it, and he's kind of looking up at me, and at this point in time, Mike is starting to, he has opened up the other door, or I guess she may have opened it, I didn't see, and he's starting to check on her and make sure she's secure, and try to talk to her, and so I'm basically on my own with this guy, and I don't know what's going on in this other car. It stopped rocking. They're just getting a front row seat to an ass whooping. So this guy's talking to me, looking straight up at me, and I couldn't. I saw his left hand because I was on his left side, and I saw his left hand, but I couldn't see his right hand, and I was on his ankle, so he wasn't going anywhere. So as he's saying this stuff, I see him kind of twist. His body kind of twists in a weird way. And I don't know if I wouldn't say I was trained for this. I wouldn't say that I necessarily expected it. I just had a feeling, I guess you could say. And in that feeling, like I said, I was holding his left shoulder so I could see his left arm, and I was holding him back so that with my foot on his ankle. So I'm trying to describe this so that you can kind of imagine it a little bit better. But he had a knife, and I didn't see it. I didn't even think about it. But he had a knife. I don't know if it was in his belt or if his pocket or what the situation was, but he did have a knife. And as I kind of anticipated it, he reaches, I see his body twist. I anticipate whatever he's doing, and he pulls the knife out, and he kind of goes up over his, like in an arcing motion over his own right shoulder, and he's basically trying to stab me in the face with this knife. It wasn't a big knife; it was like a pocket knife, but he's coming up in this like arcing motion over his own head and shoulder, and the only thing I knew to do was just get out of the way, right? Like I'm not going to try to stop him with a knife in his hand. So I just let him go. And because I was on his ankle and he was trying to, move and get up, he couldn't, and he just fell right into the car. And he hits his face, and that wrenches his body a little bit, so he can't. But he's also now moving in a way that I can't really stand on his ankle. So I move, and he starts to get up. And he has this knife in his hand, and I see him start to get up, and he's like, he's kind of on all fours, but getting up. So I just did the only thing I knew to do, and I essentially tackled him up against this person's car. And I don't know what happened really. I don't really remember the series of events after that. I kind of blanked out. And I do know that he still had the knife in his hand, and he was trying his best to get me with it. And I was able to disable his right arm, and I just hit him, and I kept hitting him, and it was one of the only times that I remember in that entire period where I kind of lost myself. And that's one of the reasons why I tell you that this story is disturbing to me, is because I did lose my temper. I lost my ability to kind of call myself a protector, because at that point in time I just wanted this guy to feel pain. So I'm gonna spare the details from this point on what happened to this guy, but I will say that he did end up having to go to the hospital. He did end up having to have some reconstructive surgery on his face. I'm not, like I said, this is not something I'm proud of, and this is not something that I'm telling. I don't tell this to sound like I'm some sort of big badass. I wish that I never had to do any of this stuff. I never would have wanted to do that, but I just kept thinking about the state this girl was in. And like I said, we had saved a couple of different girls at that point in time. We'd been out there, and but they were always. This was always a situation where we'd walk up on them and they were struggling. This was a fight. And this was the first situation where I knew we had gotten there too late. Like, this guy had definitely done something to this girl. And I was just so angry. I felt like a failure because we weren't there in time. And it's really hard to think about and to talk about, because while there's nothing I could have done to change it necessarily, we got there when we got there, and there was nothing I could have done to be there sooner. It's really hard to know that, had I been there, 10 minutes earlier, it wouldn't have happened. So, anyway, Mike had been attending to her. Her name was, I don't want to say her name. Let's call her Amber. Her name was Amber. Let's say that. I have to pause recording for a second. Sorry about that. That little weird edit there. That was a little rough. Amber didn't remember any of it. Amber doesn't, she did end up, some years later. Anyway, so Mike takes her. We were able to get some of her clothes on. We're able to get her. We had some blankets that I ran back to the club. Sorry, and got a blanket for her. And this actually, what's crazy about it is that this spot that these guys would go to, that these couples would go to, was not that far from the entrance. It was, maybe another 50 yards to the entrance. So they didn't go very far. I didn't have to run very far. So I run over, grab a blanket. We get her wrapped up. We call the cops. The cops come out, bring out an ambulance. End up filing multiple police reports over multiple incidences that have happened now. So I said this story had a happy ending, and I'm getting to that now. So this guy ends up going to the hospital. Like I said, he had to have multiple surgeries. The happy ending part of it is that, there's two happy endings really. It's that this guy actually had multiple warrants out for his arrest for sexual assault and for alleged rape. Apparently his I guess she was his ex-girlfriend at that point in time, had filed multiple police reports. And if there's nothing else that infuriates you in this whole story, this should be the thing. She had filed multiple police reports and nothing had been done to stop this guy, but she had literally complained multiple times that this guy had raped her and had brutalized her, and nobody had done anything. Nobody had stopped him. The cops didn't do anything. So in this one moment, I beat the living piss out of this guy and get him where they can catch him, and they're like, oh yeah, we have multiple complaints and multiple warrants out for this guy's arrest. So that's one good thing. This guy actually went to jail for life. As far as I know, he's still in jail. And because he had so many, and these were all like provable offenses. Like these weren't like he said, she said things. These are like, he had multiple witnesses, multiple women that came forth, and this actually went on for some, like, I want to say like a year and a half afterwards, where they were still finding evidence of this guy. I wouldn't say he was a serial rapist, but he was, this was something that he had done multiple times, and there were girls that would come forth that had actually been assaulted by him in that parking lot that we were in. And, like before we ever started patrolling there, he was doing this. So that's one good thing, is that we were able to get this guy the life that he deserved. And I hope that it was awful. And I don't regret any of the pain that I caused this man. I regret that I lost my temper, and that I let it get the best of me, but I know that in the end, what I did is the reason why he wasn't able to hurt anybody else. So, the other good thing about it was, this girl, I almost said her name, Amber, she stayed in contact with Mike and I, and her and Mike actually became very, very close. It wasn't like that. They didn't have a relationship or anything, but he basically started to mentor her. She was 16, and she had gone to the club. Her parents had dropped her and her friend off, and her friend had left her. Her friend, there were two guys that came up and started hitting on her friend, and her friend left her. And so she was kind of a wallflower, and she didn't feel very pretty, and all of these different things that kind of are the ultimate recipe for a predator. And this guy saw her and knew who she was and knew what he was looking for and got her. And we know how it ended, but I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that I ever really understood exactly what happened to her that night. Mike and her were very close, and I'm sure she told Mike what she could remember, but I don't know. I don't know what exactly happened. I don't know what this guy did to her, and honestly, I don't know if I want to know. But I do know that, she went on. She had to go through lots of therapy, and like I said, Mike ended up mentoring her and actually teaching her how to fight. He actually trained her for a few years. Mike had a very serious girlfriend at the time, and they lived together, and this girl ended up basically like coming over to Mike's house and having like his girlfriend and him, they would make dinner, and they would train and do all this stuff. And it's actually, despite how dark that story starts, it's actually a very, very good ending, because and I haven't heard about any of that for literally years now. It's been at least 15 years since I heard from them, but 12 years. But last I heard, Mike and her were still in contact. She had started a job at a doctor's office or a dentist's office, and I'm not sure which, but she was doing really well. She had had a relatively high paying job, and was she was still in therapy, and she was still going through. She still had a lot of issues. I guess her family life was not great, and that's one of the reasons why she ended up in this club. Was her mom just was an absentee mother, just did whatever. But with Mike's help and with my help a little bit, this girl ended up having, what last I heard, a very, very good life, and was able to take that one moment that could have turned into the darkest thing that had ever happened to her, and maybe quite possibly could have been, but that was able to be transformed by the actions of my partner and I in that evening. And the last thing I'll say about this is I'm not really proud to look back on the violence that came with what I did, but I am extremely proud of the fact that for that entire period of my life, when these women or girls would be at their worst point, when there was not a face that they could have seen, a man's face that they could have seen, that they would have been happy about. I know that in those moments, that my face and the actions that I took renewed some of their faith and made them feel better. And if I have nothing else to take with me to the grave, it's that for those 9.5 women, I was the difference, and I was the face, and they found comfort knowing that I was there to protect them. And that means everything to me. And that is the essence of what I want to do here. I want to help people, and I want to protect people. And I want the world to be a better place, and I want people to be more involved. And I think that's where I'm going to end that story. I don't know if you can tell or not. There was a hard edit there because I needed to take a few minutes. Telling stories about that period of time is difficult for me because, like I said, there was a lot of fear and anger that I saw and I dealt with, and I know what I did was good, and I know that in a lot of those situations I was a good guy for those people, but it's still difficult to think about when you've looked into the heart of evil, and that's what I really do consider men like that. It can be difficult to find your way back out of it, and I think that it's important to tell those stories, as dark and as scary and horrifying as they are a reality of our world, and the reason why I want to tell those stories is because I think that as long as we are able to stay, 1 foot in reality and understand that these things happen, and that there are people like this in the world, that it makes it that much more important for people to not be like that, right? Like to be the counter to that. For every man that there is like that is out there willing to take advantage of and to hurt innocent people, innocent women and innocent girls, there needs to be 10 that are willing to fight and willing to stop it. And if we can get to that point where men and women alike are willing to defend and willing to protect each other, then we're well on our way to a better world. But we're going to shift gears now, like I said. I'm going to read this quick story. This is a story that was submitted online. It was not actually an email. It was a message. So it is relatively short, but I want to read it. I think that it's a good story. So and I also just keep in mind, anybody that listens to this, you can submit stories. They don't have to necessarily be, great uplifting stories, but they can be just stories that have lessons in them, and stories of, a point in your life, or stories of something like that will let the other people who listen know who you are and know something about you. I think this is a good example of that. This is not a story that necessarily has a ringing, uplifting message, but it is uplifting, and it is great to hear stories like this. So, here we go. I've been listening to A Pebble on a Pond, and when he asked listeners to share stories, I decided to share a little of my story as it relates to his messages. My parents had 7 children. I was the middle child. They did the best they could with what they had. My mother always seemed stressed raising a brood of kids, doing household work, and usually holding down a full-time job. My father was an amazing man, but he was an alcoholic. We never knew if he would be happy or mean when he was drunk. So when he drank, which was every weekend, we walked on eggshells, never knowing who he would go after if he was pissed. I was married twice. Both men were alcoholics, mental and physical abusers, liars and cheaters. I've skipped a lot of details, but suffice it to say these situations left me scarred, mostly from the husbands. After living with them, I had absolutely no self-esteem. I was told I was crazy, stupid, boring, ugly, and worthless. I believed it had to be true. Otherwise, why would they cheat on me and treat me so horribly? I didn't cheat on them, although I was accused of it a lot. The podcasts talking about being nice and kind, honest and empathetic got me thinking that I was all of those things most of the time and still am. I believe I was that way because those traits attracted attention to me, and as a middle child and neglected wife, I really needed attention. I didn't love myself though. It's really hard. That's a really hard one to do, even for people who portray themselves as egomaniacs. The catalyst to get to a point of caring about myself was my children and music. Nothing in my life has brought me as much joy as those two things. Now I have to note here that my kids weren't always perfect angels, far from it. But we've had some good times, like Music Sundays, where we'd play just a few notes of a song using a turntable and actual vinyl records, and we'd see who could guess the song the fastest. One of us would man the turntable while the others would do the guessing. That would go on for hours. We went to a lot of concerts and movies. We played with our dogs and cats together, and we laughed until we cried. That joy made me understand that I was a good person. I was worthwhile, and I could love myself and take care of myself so I could keep enjoying what inspires me. I look forward to more podcasts, more inspiration, straight talk, and more love. That is a very it's a very good thing to read from me. I very, very much appreciate that. It makes me proud and happy to know that these couple of episodes that I've done have at least touched somebody enough that they took the time to write that and share their story. It's difficult to hear. I mean, we all know, everybody that hears this, everybody that follows me on TikTok, everybody knows that, we're all going through some shit, right? Like the world is not always great. We're always going through some sort of really bad shit in our lives. But when you read that, or when you hear that, you realize that, a lot of times the pain and the anguish that we feel is something that is dropped on us by other people. And, there are many people in this world that go through life living, I don't want to say the right way, because that sounds pompous, but living the way that you would hope most people would want to live, living a life that is peaceful and full of love and light. And those people oftentimes are the magnets that draw the worst out of people. And that's not fair, and it certainly isn't right. But unfortunately, they say hurt people, and it's very hard for somebody that is damaged and really fucked up in the head to hurt somebody who's already damaged, right? They need to find these good people and ruin them. And I believe that that's the situation there is, you have somebody that genuinely just had a love for life and saw the good in people, and that's what ended up allowing these two husbands to not take advantage of, but to put her in a position to be abused, really. She just wanted to believe so much in the goodness of these men, and she saw what they could be. She saw the potential, and at some point in time, that potential, it got to the point where it was never going to be realized, and all of the burden that she had bared in service of that potential just became that much heavier, because she knew that it was never, they were never going to reach that potential. And I think that a lot of people can relate to that. I think a lot of people can speak to that and say, I really thought that this person was going to be better. I really thought that this person was going to, be the light in my life, and that they were going to be there forever. They were going to be there, next to me on my dying day. That's the kind of thing that you think about when you love somebody. And even when they're mean to you, and even when they hurt you, and even when they cheat on you, and even when they treat you badly, you hold on to that and you try to fight through it until you can't anymore. And the reality is that, we all are trying to hold on to these people. We're trying to make them achieve what we know they can be. And unfortunately, especially in this case with this particular letter, that those reclamation projects of trying to bring those men into the light, that's not a one-person job. And if they have no interest in getting better, if they have no interest in healing and growing and being better people and better men, then there's nothing that any woman can do to help them. And that goes the other way as well. Personally, I've seen it as a man. I have seen it, up close and personal. Women aren't exactly immune from this. Men are just a little bit more self-absorbed usually. So a lot of times they're too stupid to realize that they're doing anything wrong, and that's why some of them can be saved. That's why some of them can be changed, and some of them, their eyes can be opened to the damage that they're causing. I speak from personal experience. You can spend years hurting somebody and not even realize you're doing it as a man, because if somebody doesn't come right out and tell you that you're doing it, you'll never know. And this is coming from a man. I am not a typical man in most regards. I am extremely emotional and extremely in touch with the people around me and extremely empathetic. But even me, if I feel something and then I go to you and you say, "Are you okay?" and you shrug and say, "Yes, I'm okay," or I say, "Is this a problem?" and then you say, "Yes," or "No, that's not a problem," then I'm going to believe you, because I'm going to always believe the person that I love over, whatever this gut feeling is. And that's my fault, and that's something that I've got to work on, following my instincts. But, when you're with somebody like this letter describes, that is a liar and a cheater and a swindler. Well, I can't say that because I'm kind of a swindler. But when you're talking about people like that, the mistake that we all make at the end of the day is trusting and believing in people that have not earned or have proven that you should not trust those people. So that's that story. We're gonna move into a happy one. I know that both of those were a little weighty, and I apologize for that. But sometimes story time is a great epic of knights and dragons, and sometimes it's just a simple story of what really happens in the real world and how we deal with it. Before we start with this next, and this is going to be a quick one because I'm already way over time where I wanted to be, but before we start this next one, I do want to share this quote because this made me feel really good about this, doing these story time episodes. I don't know this person. I don't know who she is, but this is from Lisa Cron, who wrote an article for the magazine Wired. And she said, "Story, as it turns out, was crucial to our evolution, more so than opposable thumbs. Opposable thumbs let us hang on, but story told us what to hang on to." I think that that's a beautifully, well, if I read it better, beautifully illustrated point about how important it is to tell these stories. And one of the reasons why I'm trying desperately to get people to send me stories is because it's really easy to lose sight of what we've done in our lives, and it's really easy to forget that each of us is a story. Like, each of us has a story to tell. You know, going back to the previous episode about the main character, one of the points that I tried to make in that episode, and I hope that if you've listened to it, you took away from that, is that we really are all main characters in our own stories. Now, does that mean that you're the only one that matters? Absolutely not. Don't be like that. But it does mean that, you know, someday we're all going to die. And our story is what's going to be left of us. So tell it. Tell your story. And it doesn't really matter what it is. Sometimes it can be a 40-minute tale of having to stop sexual predators. And sometimes it can just be a quick story detailing who you are and where you came from. It doesn't have to be, there's no one way of doing it. There's no one method of getting your story out into the world. But it is important to tell it. And it is important that people know who you are. Even if they don't know your name, speak your story. Tell your truth. I think that that's the way that we are remembered. And that is the thing, like she says in this quote, that's the thing that we hold on to. That's the reason why we are who we are as a people. We moved forward. Evolution was possible because of our storytelling. It gave us a reason to keep going in the night. So just remember that. Now, this next story is a quick one. I'm not going to hold you up for too long, but this is a story of one of the greatest kindnesses that anyone has ever shown me. And I'm not gonna give full details on this whole thing because some of the people, well, one of the people involved in this story is let's just say not happy with me. So I'm gonna try to keep it a little loosey goosey, but let's just say that some years ago I was in a pretty dark place, as detailed in my TikTok, and I'm sure you guys have picked up on some of my stories here. I have suffered from really, really like powerful depression for the greater part of 2 decades. And while I am on the other side of it, I am not completely out of it, but I do feel better now than I have in a long, long time. I want to say about 15 or 16 years ago, I had a person come into my life that was what I needed at that point in time, was a beacon of light in my life. And one of the reasons why that person was so important to me was the fact that they were so giving and so warm in like every regard. Just was always there with a hug or a kind word or whatever it was that I needed at the time. And I was, like I said, I was extremely depressed and wasn't really getting that feeling from anyone else in my life at the time. So this person came into my life and for many months was this beacon of hope and inspiration for me. Little did I know that emotion and that love and that warmth that I felt would end up having a very physical representation. And what I mean by that is, I don't remember. It was in October, and I don't remember the year exactly, but it was in October, and my daughter had wanted to go to the pet store to get some fish. We had recently got her a fish tank. In September, we had gotten her a fish tank, and she wanted to get some more fish for the fish tank. So we went to this pet store, and we were basically just letting her go find stuff. And in the process of that, I was just walking around the pet store. And this was a pet store that doesn't exist anymore, but they did do like the puppies and the kittens and all that stuff. And so I would sit there and I would look at the puppies and play with the kittens and stuff. Well, I come across this one little glass box, and there's I think there were 3 kittens in it. Well, they were ragdolls. They were little baby ragdoll kittens, and they were, when I tell you they were the most stinking adorable things on the planet, I can't possibly. I mean, woo! I just wanted to kiss them, and so I'm sitting there playing with one. They had little holes, like little air holes in the side of the glass, and so I'm sitting there putting my finger in, playing with the one, and then I see I could only see 2 at the time, and there was like a little blanket or something in there, and I see this blanket kind of moving. I'm like, oh, there's another one in there, and I see this little head poke out and look at me, and in that instant, I it's hard to describe. There was almost more than immediate, instantaneously. I knew that kitten was my kitten. And I really do believe that kitten knew that I was its human. It really was that quick. And I was completely and totally in love. There was just no ifs, ands, or buts. I had to have this kitten in my life. And as I sat there looking at him, I put my finger through the little hole, and he immediately comes running up. I mean, he's just come out of a full sleep, little kitten sleep, and comes running up and was so excited and rubbing and loving, and I couldn't have been more in love with anything or anyone at that point in time. And that's when the reality of the situation hits me square in the face, which was, this was a $600 cat. Now, before anybody gets upset, I am very much a, don't buy pets at a pet store person. I have very many cats. I have very many dogs, and none of them were purchased. All of them were rescues. That being said, none of them ever meant as much to me as this cat did in that moment. So I don't have $600. I didn't. At the time, I was trying to run my business, and it wasn't succeeding, and I didn't have that money, and I was heartbroken. I was just destroyed. Well, as I said, we were there to get fish for my daughter, and this person that I had mentioned before, she was there, and it was actually her idea. She was going to buy the fish for her, and she, I went up to her and I was like, you have to see this cat. You have to see this cat. Oh my God, you've got to see him. So I go over, and so I bring her and everybody else over to see this cat. And I mean, obviously they're not picking up the vibe, right? They know that I want this kitten, and they know that I'm really excited about him, but like, they're not getting the same feeling that I am from this kitten. But I'm desperate. I'm like, we got to find a way. I've got to get this cat. I've got to. So this person, she, I can't really say I understand it. At the time, she wasn't, rich or anything like that. She didn't have a lot of money, but she just knew that I needed this kitten. Like, she understood what I was saying. I don't know if she necessarily believed the way that I did, but she knew what I was saying. She believed in what I was saying. And she said, well, let me see what I can do. Now, this is a person that at the time was like waitressing, right? Like, she didn't have a lot of money, but she I just thinking about it, just it kind of makes me emotional just thinking about it. But she basically went and talked to the people, and they said, well, this pet store, you can get a credit card for this pet store or whatever. That was a national chain at the time. I don't think they exist anymore, but you could get a credit card, and I guess she had good enough credit that she qualified. So she actually ended up taking out getting a credit card for this pet store, and like putting herself in credit debt basically to be able to buy me this $600 purebred ragdoll kitten that I, had this religious experience with. And I remember them coming over and being like, well, do you want to take him out of the thing and hold him and stuff like that? And I was like, well, yes, of course I do, but I don't need to. Like, I already know that this is my cat. Like, you don't. And they're like, okay. And they thought I was kind of weird. But, they took him out of the little thing and they brought him to me. And he immediately curled up on my shoulder and really just never left. So she goes ahead and she takes out the credit card, and they end up putting him on this line of credit that she ended up having to pay off over the course of like a year or something like that. She didn't, like I said, she wasn't making a whole lot of money. But this was one of the greatest gifts that anyone has ever given me, and one of the greatest kindness that anyone has ever shown me. She really put herself out there, and in doing that, it's hard to describe how much of a difference this made in my life. Like, it literally changed everything in my life from that point forward. I ended up going through quite a bit over the next so many years, and there were plenty of times where that little cat, who I ended up naming Yoda, where that little Yoda literally saved my life over and over and over again. And the really beautiful thing about that was that every time I would have that moment, or there would be a moment with him, which was every day, because every moment we spent together was magical for me. Like, I literally had a familiar that he never left my side. He was always with me. He would be on my shoulder. He would go get in the car with me. I would take him to work. Like, this was a cat that was with me all the time. This wasn't just like a pet that I kept at home. And every single time that I would have to go through something bad, or there would be a dark point, he would be there with me. And in a way, that meant that she was there with me. And that really was a very, very, very special gift, and a very special way of conveying, like, love and what somebody means to you. Now, I know obviously there's a dollar sign attached to that, so maybe it cheapens it a little bit, but you're talking about a life, like literally bringing a life into my world. Yoda was my baby, and literally was the most important thing to me for a long time. And my kids, maybe that fucked them up a little bit, but my kids knew, like, Yoda was number one. He was my baby. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean I would throw my kids under a bus for Yoda, but it does mean that, they knew that if Yoda wasn't comfortable, nobody got to be comfortable. So that was just one of the rules. I ended up losing Yoda some years ago, so it's not all happy endings, and the loss of him echoes even now. But the time that we did have, as short as it was beautiful and wonderful and tragic and everything that a good love story should be. And as much as I want to say that it was just about this kitten, when a lot of it was also, the story of me and this person. Because when you show somebody that kind of kindness, when you show somebody that kind of care and that kind of concern, it will echo for eternity. And they'll always remember that. So just remember that as you move through life. Sometimes it's a grand gesture, like bringing a kitten into somebody's life. Sometimes it's as simple as holding somebody's door. But all of these things that we do, and all of these choices that we make, have a long-lasting impact and will cause ripples that change everything in the world around us. So there's a reason why we call it a pebble in a pond. And there's a reason why I really do believe that if I can get enough people on board with this, that we can really make a difference in this world. And it's because I can't sit here and tell this story about my cat without getting emotional, without tears coming to my eyes. And when I think about the cat, I think about that person. And the level of kindness and compassion and care that goes into taking on a financial burden like that, just because somebody says, I feel connected to this kitten. I need this kitten in my life. There's not a lot of people out there that would have done that. Actually, I don't know anybody else that would have done that. So just remember that you don't have to have that grand gesture to make a difference in somebody's life. But if you can, you should. Because you could very well be changing the course of not just that person's life, but the course of all history. You just don't know. You don't know what your kindness and what your love can do, but it will move mountains and it will change the world. I think it was Anne Frank that said, no one has ever become poor by giving. And I think that's what we're gonna leave this episode on. Our next episode is actually going to come out on Christmas Eve, if everything goes right this weekend. And I think we're going to talk about Christmas. I think that's going to be the topic of that episode. And not just Christmas, but what the Christmas season means to people, both good and bad. I do want to keep this on a positive note, but we also need to discuss, as somebody who's dealt with depression and things like that, we do need to discuss that part of it. And so we'll touch on that, and we'll tell a couple of Christmas stories that will give some people some positive feelings going into their Christmas day. Anyway, that's where we are, folks. Thanks for coming along for Storytime, and I really do appreciate those of you that have listened and that continue to listen to all of the episodes. I don't necessarily see all the analytics, so I don't necessarily know who's listening to what, but I'm building this thing from the ground up, and I'm trying to learn every step of the way. And so whatever feedback or criticism or words of encouragement and advice you may have, I appreciate all of them. If you haven't followed me on TikTok yet, it's Pebble in a Pond Podcast on TikTok. I invite you to follow me there. We also have a link tree, which I think is posted on most of our pages, but that should point you to any of the other socials we have. We do have an Instagram that I'm still building. We have a YouTube channel, which I'm still working on. All of these things are works in progress, but we are trying to get out there. We're trying to get the message out there of what I'm trying to build here and what we're trying to do. This community that I really do want to build and engage with and start to really make some big changes. So there you have it. Thanks again. And y'all take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Have a good day.